You are listening to RadioTorah.com, the only radio station playing Torah 24 hours a day.
Cheese is not moderate by nature.
Hello, everybody. Hold on. I'm having technical
Very, very
issues.
deep. I can give you, I can spend the rest of this section giving you examples. I will not displace the Torah field, but I will give you.
Okay, everybody. Hi. I'm so sorry about that. I had some extreme technical issues. My husband's on a very important phone call, so he's not really able to help me right now, so I'm really sorry. But welcome to the Kosher class. This is the second installment. This week I'll be covering the first chapter of Rabbi Apostol's book, Kosher for the Clueless but Curious. If you haven't gotten it, it's an amazing book. I highly recommend it. It's a great resource for after our class, whenever. It's a great resource. You can find it used online. I got mine for $3. So you really shouldn't have to spend that much money. It's it's totally worth your time. So I am covering the first chapter, and I'll be covering the first section of the glossary. And it's kind of weird because there's a glossary in the middle of the book, but it sort of sets things up so that you'll understand better where he's sort of coming from, and he can communicate in the language of kosher, which has its own sort of special nuance. So let's go ahead and get started. If you're following along in the book, I am starting on page 19, the beginning of chapter 1. Now this is called Some Soul for the Food. And basically, the gist of this chapter is that you are what you eat, sort of philosophy. Last week we talked about the concept of what doesn't nourish me destroys me. And we really, in Judaism, nothing could be a more appropriate saying. We want to eat foods that elevate us spiritually, and keeping kosher is the Torah prescribed way to do that. So this is just a little bit more of the philosophy behind kosher in this first chapter. And then in the second chapter, in the glossary, we'll really get into the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts technical stuff of what you're going to experience. Also tonight, I'm going to have sort of a sample recipe and a product review. So that should be fun. Okay, let's get started. So I'm on page 19. That's where I'm starting. And I'm just going to sort of cover what he covers in the chapter. I don't really like to read so much per se, unless I'm reading or quoting scripture. And I'll let you know if I do that. Okay? So he speaks in this first chapter about Whole Foods grocery stores. Now, if any of you have a Whole Foods grocery store in your community, you know that it's very committed to sort of, being a whole experience for the body. And it's extremely successful. He lays down some statistics that it does better than Food Lion, Albertsons, these gigantic grocery store chains, because its philosophy is that it wants you to choose foods that will help you become the person that you want to be. You want to lose weight, you can get foods at Whole Foods that will help you do so. You want to get healthier, you want to lower your cholesterol, you can choose foods at Whole Foods that help you do so. And sort of the whole store is geared towards this philosophy, and he really mentions this in the first part of the book. Now, what does this have to do with kosher, besides the fact that Whole Foods happens to have a lot of kosher food? Well, it's the philosophy of you are what you eat. If we want to become higher spiritual beings, we have to keep a diet that helps promote that. And, Judaism is maybe the oldest religion to do it, but it's certainly not the only one. But in Judaism, it's a very, very strong and very, very important force in the Jewish faith. So, that's why we're here. Okay, he also mentions a few other concepts that help point to the you are what you eat sort of idea. He says that in prisons, they've done studies and they found that The more vitamins, minerals, and essential fatty acids a prisoner intakes in their diet, the less violent outbursts, the less, the less chaotic the prison population is. It really helps to create a less violent, more focused prisoner, and they believe that this can help in rehabilitation. So this is just another example of the whole theory that you are what you eat. If you have nourishing foods, if you have all those vitamins and minerals that you need, it helps your brain be more calm and calms down that sort of violent impulse that can be inherent in some criminals. Okay. Another thing he points to, and I'm sure you've all had experience with this, is the sugar thing, what I call the sugar thing. That when you've ingested a lot of sugar, or if you've ever seen a child come home from a birthday party where they've had cake and ice cream and candy and maybe even a cupcake or a cookie on top of that, they are nuts. And then later in the day, they crash and burn, and they have a horrible crash and burn. You don't want this. Basically, sugar can create, too much sugar can wreak major havoc on your body. Now, I'm a big fan of sugar, but I think it should be eaten in moderation, of course. It's something I'm working on myself. But that's another just point that he makes about you are what you eat. Sugar can just mess you up royally and mess up your day, and it can mess up your kid's day, and in turn your day if your kid has had a lot of sugar. Okay. So one of the points that he makes is that food helps the Jewish people to be a light unto the nations. So it says in the Torah that the Jewish people are supposed to be a light unto the nations, a nation of priests, a holy people. Okay? And food is one of the ways that we can accomplish that. I just want to read a little bit from the book here. Let me see. Okay. So he goes back to Whole Foods, and he quotes the Whole Foods CEO, but if you replace Whole Foods sort of with Judaism, it sort of makes the same point. Whole Foods is not a business for a clique or for the elite. We wanted the philosophy of the stores to spread throughout culture. We wanted to change the world. Just like Jews believe in Tikkun Olam, making the world right, we are supposed to be the example for the rest of the world. And how can we do that? What's one of the ways that we can change the world? By the way that we eat and keeping ourselves nourished and whole so that we can fulfill that. Okay. Eating is an essential physical need. We cannot survive without food. Most of our physical needs are taken care of automatically. Your heart is beating without you thinking about it. You're blinking your eyes without you thinking about it. So on, you're taking in air really without thinking about it. But eating, you really have to stop and think, oh gosh, it's been 3 hours since I ate last. I'm starving. I really should have a yogurt or whatever. So it's an essential physical need that involves awareness and conscious control. This really separates us from the animals. An animal, just eats whatever that's in front of it. Obviously, herbivores are going to eat vegetables, and carnivores are going to eat, we tend more to the meat side, but they're not thinking about, what choice can I make? Can I make myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or should I have a steak? So, it's an act over which we are capable of exercising great control. And if you think about it, he points out here that it's pretty clear that the basis for civilization is self-control. If everyone was just running around impulsively doing whatever they wanted at any time, then it would be a very, very crazy world. The cars on the street would be crashing into each other. People would just be stealing stuff from stores left and right. But civilization requires that we control our impulses and we become civilized human beings. That we are different from the animals. It's a fundamental difference, the self-control piece. He brings up a little story about his 4-year-old daughter. He said he didn't grow up in a kosher home. but he keeps kosher at his house, and his mother had brought a cookie for his 4-year-old daughter, and she asked her mother first, is it okay if we eat this cookie? Is it kosher? The grandmother could not believe that the child at 4, when impulses, especially hunger, and a cookie placed in front of you, it's so raw, it's so instinctual, it's so almost animal, that she had the self-control to say, can I eat this cookie? Is it kosher? Before she just put the cookie in her mouth. And like, this can carry over to a lot of different, aspects of our lives. Spending money. You have to ask yourself, do I really need this before you write out that check? Any aspect of your life you can think of, you can exercise self-control in that realm. So it's very, kosher goes beyond just the obvious. Okay. Whoa. Sorry, my camera sort of moved there. Okay. In Judaism, the ability to be able to sometimes say yes and sometimes say no to one's most basic appetites is not only the sine qua non for a civil society, but also for a holy one. So, now we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts about why kosher. Why are we required to eat an animal that only has cloven hooves and chews its own cud? We'll just cover a little bit of what Simpson Raphael Hirsch says about it, and then I'll also give you sort of my take and what I've learned about it. Okay. So it says here, this is Simpson Raphael Hirsch, who's from the mid-1800s, writing about kosher laws. In Jewish law, all vegetables are permitted for food without discrimination. Next in order of desirability as human food would come those animals that are herbivorous, sorry, it's a big word, and therefore nearer the vegetable world. These animals spend a great deal of time in the absorption of food that may be termed the vegetative activity of animals. It's well known that animals that chew their own cud, they have 4 stomachs. So it takes them a very long time to digest anything that they have eaten. Whereas a carnivore, it just sort of like, very quickly digests. So the more an animal is like a plant, the more it's desirable for a human to eat. And what Rabbi Hirsch is trying to say here is that we want to be as peaceful and as passive a people as possible. Obviously, you don't want to be passive when it's not necessary, when you need to be aggressive, but it's important for people to be peaceful. And one of the ways that we do this is through eating animals who are peaceful. We don't eat animals who are predators. No, there are no kosher animals with claws, for example. And this is just, Rabbi Appelsdorf here is just sort of pointing out that we're ingesting sort of the qualities that we want to have as human beings. We want to have that peaceful, long digesting, slower sort of mentality as opposed to the pouncer, the aggressive one, the, nail it. He says it in the book, kill it and grill it philosophy. Having said that, I should point out that keeping kosher is what's known as a chuk, which is a law. There are different laws in Judaism, some which the reasons for them are obvious, that they keep society normal, like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. They sort of make sense. But some don't on the surface make so much sense. They're called chukim. And keeping kosher is a chuk. We don't know exactly the reasons for it. We can guess. Obviously, eating more docile animals leads to a more docile, peaceful, you are what you eat philosophy. So we're hoping that it will bring us more docile, peaceful sort of feeling. But the ultimate reason that we do it is because the Torah says so. The Torah is God's guidebook that He gave us to live a happy life. if you're a Jew or even if you're not a Jew, even if you're, one of the B'nai Noach, people who follow the Noahide laws, the Torah is a handbook for happiness. Really, the laws, even though they might not make sense to us now, we have to know that God knows what's best for us. I mean, He is our creator. And we have to just trust Him. So even though we can rationalize these laws and say, oh, this makes us a little bit more docile by eating these docile animals, ultimately we do it because the Torah says so. And because that is Hashem's will. We know He knows what's best for us. So, moving right along. Okay. Judaism understands the human being as a blend of spiritual and physical, body and soul. I mentioned last week that I heard somewhere, I don't remember what the source was, and I'm very sorry for that a human being feels ashamed when they're naked because they realize that they are a spiritual entity inside an animal body. And it's a very, that's a very amazing concept to think, hey, I'm an angel, but I have this, I'm in an animal body. It's a very unique position that human beings have. And as Jews, we have an opportunity to elevate ourselves to a higher level. So, the more our diet consists of foods that are rich in animalistic qualities, more carnivorous, the more our own bodies may be inspired to strike out in an aggressive manner that will be at odds with the gentler, more refined inclinations of the soul. And again, we just spoke about you are what you eat, that philosophy. It's just very much underlining that in this section. Okay. The next part, Rabbi Apostolf starts to talk about how the mundane really elevates a person. And he quotes here from the Medrash that says, "A man is not elevated to greatness without first being tested with seemingly petty manners." And he mentions Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, who was a shepherd, who after all of his, amazing stuff, his first real job was as a shepherd. And he was tested not, to slay a dragon or do something grandiose, but the test was, would he take his sheep past other people's pastures, or would he let his sheep just graze in other people's pastures, or would he do the right thing and have them graze on his land, which is further away? And time again, he did it. And I think Rabbi Apostolf puts this beautifully. I'll read a little bit. It says, what Hashem wanted to know was, does this guy have the integrity to work harder week after week and month after month than others might think necessary, just to make sure that no one else is robbed of a few patches of grass? And it says that this seemingly trivial effort proved to God that Moses was truly the man for the ultimate job. Okay, I'm also going to read a little section of the Torah for you here that talks about a little section from the Torah and a little Rashi Dvar Torah, which helps us explain the elevation of the mundane. So this is from Leviticus 11, verses 45 through 47. It says, "For I am God who elevated you when I took you out of the land of Egypt for the purpose of being your God. And therefore you should be holy because I am holy. This is the teaching regarding the animal, the bird, every living creature that swarms in the water, and every creature that creeps on the ground. Distinguish between the impure and the pure, between the animal that is permissible to eat and the animal that is not eaten." So what Rashi says is, wait a minute. The Torah tells us elsewhere exactly how to determine what's a kosher animal and what's not. So why does the Torah again need to speak about the distinction between permissible and impermissible animals? Isn't this kind of redundant? Well, here is how our master Rashi answers this. He says, of course we already know which animals are kosher and which are not. However, these verses are actually only referring to kosher animals and are addressing the possible imperfections in the slaughtering process that can render an otherwise permissible animal impermissible. and these imperfections can be so minute that they are only detectable by a well-trained eye. What we find is that there's a very sublimely grand concept, the deliverance from Egypt, packaged together with hair-splitting minutiae. He says here, the Torah speaks about the great event of the Exodus and God's calling of the Jewish people to live on a lofty spiritual plane. And in the very next verse, the Torah warns us to be careful about tiny imperfections that could render an otherwise kosher animal unfit for Jewish consumption. True greatness is to be found in the countless, small, unnoticed, and unapplauded acts that together make up the great tapestry of life. And this is totally evident in the kosher kitchen. Like, everybody has to fix themselves something to eat. Everybody has to go into the kitchen, take out a plate, make whatever it is, eat it, and then clean up afterwards. That's just something everybody does day in and day out. So mundane, so seemingly, effortless or ridiculous. Where's the heroism in this? But the heroism is that Jews who keep kosher not only look at what they eat, but also everything associated with what they eat as one big spiritual diet from God. And in the mundanity, is that a word? I guess, of the kitchen, we find the deep sanctity and uplifting spirit of a relationship with God, just as much as we find it in the sanctuary of synagogue. This is an amazing thing. The same sanctity that we find in Shul, at the highest moment of Yom Kippur, can be in the deepest, most ridiculous, day-to-day, nonsense parts of our kitchen, even our dishes. So, Judaism really completes the elevation of the seemingly mundane. And if you ever needed anything to point to this, the study of Kabbalah is one. In the Kabbalah, it mentions sort of the connections between everything. The sense that God's presence is coming down to this earth and filling the whole world. Your bookcase, every aspect, every ridiculous little part of your home is filled with the presence of Hashem. And so that's how Judaism deals with stuff. It just, it's the seemingly mundane elevated to the greatest spiritual heights. And that's such a beautiful concept. So I hope that, you can take this into your kitchen and make your kitchen a holy place. Read a book? You got a book, Pig? Okay. Another thing that I find interesting about this little section is it speaks to the role of women. And so many times, quote-unquote textbook feminists or women's liberals say, oh, women should get out of the kitchen and so on and so forth. But if you think about it in Jewish terms, the role of a woman in a kitchen is one of the highest possible. If you're being tested every day in the highest spiritual matters, in the most mundane place in your house, which is the kitchen, a place you have to go every day to make something to eat, a woman really has an opportunity when she is in the kitchen to elevate her home to the highest spiritual plane, to truly make her home a miniature version of the Beis HaMikdash. And that is amazing. That makes me want to get back in the kitchen and cook some more. But as I cook, I have to remember that I rely upon Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the master of the universe, to help me and guide me to know the laws, to do the right thing, and hopefully, God forbid, not to make any non-kosher accidents in my house. Okay, moving right along to the next chapter. So we're going to start with chapter 2, the glossary, and I'm only going to cover the first part. And this really ends on page 37. Okay, and this is where we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of it. So I'm breaking this chapter down, and I'm going to go really slowly through it. Don't worry, you're going to have a chance to ask questions. Hold on, my camera is having difficulties. There we go. Okay, so the first thing camera, come here. Okay, so the first thing that Shimon Apostolf mentions is blood. The Torah forbids the eating of blood of animals and birds. Fish blood is permitted to be eaten. So in old times, the way that they would get rid of blood from the meat is to soak it and salt it. And there was a very prescribed way of doing it. But now, like 99% of the meat that you buy in the store is already soaked and salted for you. So thank God, now you do not have to worry about that part of the process. It's already been done. But you still need to be aware that blood is not permissible to eat. I think it's funny that, well, in medieval European times, and even up till now, there's such a thing as called blood libel, where they claim that Jews would slaughter a Christian child and use their blood in their Passover sacrifice to make matzah, which is, if you know anything about kosher laws, is ridiculous because blood is expressly forbidden to eat. You are not allowed to eat blood, even blood from your steak. You have to have all that blood gone and do the soaking and salting process before you can eat it. So not only the fact that slaughtering a child is just nonsense, and Jews would never do that, in their ritual practice, but we're totally expressly forbidden to eat blood. So, having said that, moving right along. Okay. Also, one more thing I wanted to mention in blood. Blood spots in raw eggs is an issue. If you are making a cake or something where you are, or a kugel, or something that you're required to put eggs in, please do me a favor. Break the egg into a separate dish, preferably a clear one or a white one where the blood spot will be readily seen, and then put it into your cake. Because if you put a egg with a blood spot into your cake, the whole thing is pretty much messed up. So just save yourself some time and get yourself a little one of those Pyrex measuring cups, one for meat and one for dairy, and crack that egg into there before you put it in the cake. Okay, moving right along. Okay, so the next section is Chalav Yisrael. Now this means, in Hebrew, Jewish milk. Chalav Yisrael is milk whose production was supervised from a Jew from the time of actual milking until the conclusion of the production process. Today, in the United States, Canada, and other countries where strict governmental regulations outlaw the use of any milk other than cow's milk in commercial plants, the rabbis have given, many rabbis, I should say not all, have given permission for people to go ahead and eat that. If you see OU with a D next to it, or a Chaf K with a D next to it, those mean that those things are dairy. And most of those things, they rely upon the milk that's in it, that it was produced under governmental regulations, so that's only cow's milk, and no other treif or non-kosher milk like pig's milk or camel's milk was added into it. And we can rely upon that heter today in the United States, which is a really great thing and makes a lot of products available to us. For example, if you go into your store to buy a gallon of milk, you can pick out any milk and it will be kosher as long as it was processed in the United States, because the FDA regulates that only cow's milk is supposed to be used. However, if you want to keep a higher level of kosher, if you crave a higher degree of spiritual sensitivity, and that sort of you are what you eat philosophy, there are many pious Jews who have chosen to only drink milk that was supervised by a Jew, and that is called Chalav Yisrael. If you have questions about Chalav Yisrael, of course, write to me or ask me at the end of this class and we can discuss. Okay. The next bit is eggs. Eggs from kosher birds are kosher. Eggs from non-kosher birds are not kosher. Embryos are not kosher, and fertilized eggs, there's a question, but we really don't eat them. A blood spot in a raw egg may be a sign of fertilization, and so you really have to watch. So you can eat chicken eggs, duck eggs, turkey. I've never heard of turkey eggs, but you can eat those things. Ostrich eggs, which, trust me, I have seen in some of the health food stores. Those are not kosher. Please do not eat them. But chicken eggs, eggs that you use every day, those are totally fine, and they're parv, which means they're neither meat nor dairy. You can use them with meat or you can use them with dairy, and they're both totally fine. Okay? Moving right along. The word fleischig. Now I'm going to type that in so you can see what that looks like for those of you that don't have the book. Kosher is definitely not just about food. It's more about spirituality than anything else. But okay, so fleischig is the Yiddish word meaning meaty. It identifies foods that cannot be eaten with dairy products. And we'll get into some of the more nitty-gritty details of that later on in this class. A food can be fleischig without containing actual pieces of meat. For example, if you cooked carrots and potatoes along with your pot roast, those pieces of vegetable, while not being meat, actual meat, they are considered to have meat quality. So you cannot eat them with a glass of milk. Okay? So you cannot combine those vegetables that have been cooked along with the meat with milk. Now, there are some products that I will cover later on that can help you get around this. And thank God we live in a day and age where this is possible. It opens up a whole realm of food possibilities to us, which is very exciting. Okay. Cookware, dishes, and cutlery that are used exclusively for meat are also referred to as fleischig, and people refer to themselves as fleischig. He speaks a little bit later on in this chapter about waiting 6 hours between meat and milk. So sometimes you'll say, I'm fleischig, to your friend. Say you're over at your friend's house and they offer you a cup of dairy hot chocolate. And you, 3 hours ago, had a big pastrami sandwich. Well, you'd have to say to them, I'm sorry, I can't have this hot chocolate, I'm fleischig. Which just means, doesn't mean you're meaty, just means you've had meat and you're waiting those 6 hours until you can partake of dairy again. Okay, moving along. Glatt kosher. Okay, this is very complicated. Glatt is a Yiddish word that means smooth. It refers to a procedure that takes place after a kosher animal has been properly slaughtered. For an animal to be kosher, it cannot have any illness or serious injury at the time it is slaughtered. So basically what they do is they inspect the lungs to make sure that there are no blemishes, and that makes the animal glatt. Okay, so he goes through a very technical explanation of this that you can look up in the book. Glatt kosher is used in a colloquial sense to mean very kosher, extra kosher, but really in Jewish law it just means that meat can be glatt kosher or not glatt kosher, okay? If it's glatt kosher, it's a higher level, sort of like Chav Yisrael is for milk. But it doesn't, like, milk cannot be glatt kosher in Jewish law. It's only for meat, okay? It says here, fish, soup, salad, pizza, and all other foods are simply kosher or not. Okay, moving right along, insects. The vast majority of insects are not kosher, and today the practice is to not eat any insects at all. A number of common vegetables often contain insects and must be carefully examined before they can be eaten. You have to be very, very careful about insects, because if you eat one tiny thrip that got into your onion slice that you're eating, that is the same as eating an entire ham steak. It is a very, very non-kosher practice. So do not eat insects. Check all your vegetables very carefully as you're cutting them. Hold them up to the light to make sure any insects haven't crawled into the skin of the vegetable. And just, be really thorough and make sure that you don't have any bugs in your produce. Okay, moving on. Kosher for Passover is a whole other ball game. Passover, we don't eat any leaven. So we don't eat, cereals, beer, cookies, crackers, breads, pastries, and so on. Even foods that contain small amounts of grain products like, ketchup or soda. So there are kosher for Passover sodas, but regular soda is just not kosher for Passover. So those may contain small, minute amounts of grain, and those are not okay for Passover. That is 1 week per year, and I'll have a whole special class on kosher for Passover. So just know that there's kosher for Passover. Usually there'll be a little P next to the hechsher, and it's good. Just know that it's there, and when we get to Passover time, we'll definitely talk about it more in depth. Okay. Kosher salt is a coarse kind of salt. Kosher salt is the next term. Usually it's used for draining the blood out of the meat. We first spoke about blood at the beginning of this chapter, and the kosher salt really is this very coarse salt that pulls the blood out of the meat. But it's also really great for seasoning, so feel free to use it as a seasoning. I use it all the time. Okay. Milchig is a Yiddish word meaning dairy or milky. It is very common to hear silverware, restaurants, food products is referred to either being fleischig, which means meat, which we talked about, or milchig, which means dairy. And people in America especially, I don't know about Eretz Yisrael, but here in America they throw that around all the time. Okay. Milk and meat are two general categories of food that can never, never, never be cooked or eaten together. Never. Not ever. No more cheeseburgers, people. You cannot have milk and meat together. So even two food items which are perfectly kosher on their own, say a piece of kosher cheese and a kosher hamburger, if you put them together, that becomes treif or non-kosher. Okay. Next, parv. So parv is a term that means neutral. It means something that's not meat and it's not dairy and it can be eaten with either category. So some examples of this are all vegetables, fruits, most breads are parv, most beverages are parv, spices, rice, tofu. He says Slurpees and cotton candy. And I think it's important to point out that eggs are parv and fish is parv. Some people have a custom not to eat fish with dairy, but if you do, it's not the end of the world. Okay. Like it is when you eat meat with dairy. We don't do that anymore. No. That is the end of this. Okay. Pork. It's the non-kosher food. Of course, everybody knows this. Shchita. Now, shchita is kosher slaughter. And the person who does this kosher slaughter is called a shochet. He's a specially trained rabbi who has a special knife that makes sure that it inflicts the least amount of pain on the animal and it provides the most kosher way of slaughtering the animal. It's very detailed laws and halacha laid out in the Torah, and the written and the oral Torah, for us to follow. So I'm just going to give you a couple of the rules for those who are vegetarians and sensitive to animal stuff. I'm so sorry. It says, an exceptionally sharp knife must be used so that an animal dies from a clean, almost effortless cut that does not involve any tearing or sawing of the flesh. The cut must be made on a certain area of the throat, and both the windpipe and the food pipe must be severed. With regard to kosher birds or fowl, it is necessarily only one of those organs can be cut. So just a few of the very minute and detailed halachas. Shachtim are very, very well-trained rabbis. They have to know a lot of detailed laws really thoroughly. Okay, moving right along. A treburing. Treburing is the process of removing veins and non-kosher fats from kosher meat. Even though meat from a kosher animal is perfectly kosher, the blood and certain fats are not. These are removed by the butcher after the animal is slaughtered and before the meat is salted. So that's not something that you need to worry about at your house. Treif. You'll hear me say treif a lot. Now, treif is a general term that means non-kosher. It literally means in Hebrew torn and refers to an animal that had died because of a tear instead of being properly slaughtered. Instead of a clean cut, a tear. But it has evolved in use to mean a lot of food that is non-kosher. Cheeseburgers are treif. Pork is treif. Shellfish are treif. So on and so forth. Okay. So this is my last little tidbit, and then I'll do a quick product review and I'll take questions. Okay. So in addition to the prohibition against eating meat and milk together, you cannot consume milk immediately after eating meat. This is because meat can get stuck in your teeth. It takes longer to digest, so on and so forth. So the widespread practice is to wait 6 hours after you eat meat before you eat dairy. So usually what I do is when I'm about to say my closing bracha, if I'm going to bench or I'm going to say a closing bracha, I look at the clock and I make sure I know what time it is. And then I automatically in my mind count forward 6 hours so that I know what time I'll be totally okay to eat any dairy products. You really, I mean, this practice varies in custom. So you should, if you're coming into observance new, 6 hours is the standard. However, if you're in a community that deviates from that, it's totally acceptable, but you need to follow the advice of your rabbi, and you can see your local Orthodox rabbi about what your local practice is, okay? But for your purposes of you at home, if you're trying to do this on your own with these classes, wait 6 hours after eating meat to drink or eat anything dairy. Now, it doesn't apply to dairy. Some people say that all you have to do is wash your hands after eating dairy, rinse out your mouth, and eat something parve, like a piece of vegetable or a piece of bread in between eating the dairy and eating the meat. However, I think it's better to wait at least a half an hour just to be absolutely sure that you have no particles of dairy in your mouth and that all that stuff has moved through into your stomach. So my advice to you is to wait half an hour after eating dairy, but if you absolutely cannot wait, you've eaten your dairy and you're ready to move on to the chicken course, just take a drink, wash your hands, eat something parve, and you should be okay. But my advice is to really wait half an hour. Okay, that concludes my, what? Yeah, oh, and you also have to make your closing bracha after eating the dairy before eating the meat. Don't forget that. That's important too. Okay, so that concludes my portion with the Apostroph book. I just wanted to show you guys the cookbook that I mentioned last week, which is the Spice and Spirit, the Lubavitch Women's Cookbook. It's a great resource. It has a lot of really hands-on advice about kosher halachas. It also has advice about things like holidays. It describes the holidays and the customs. It even has sample menus for holidays, and it's really great. So I'm going to hold that up to the camera so you can see what it looks like, and I will also type it into the box so you can see. Okay, so I'm going to type it in right now. Just move this. Okay? Now, I'm going to tell you about a common food, a snack food that we all love, and in it I'm going to teach you a little halacha and also give you a product review. So, I'm from Idaho, where I come from. Baking potatoes are huge, and we gotta have our potatoes with butter and sour cream. Oh yeah. However, if you're like me and you only have one oven in your house, and that oven is used to cook meat, can't have butter or sour cream on that potato. Remember how I mentioned before, vegetables that are cooked with meat, you're not allowed to eat with dairy? Same thing with a vegetable that you've cooked in a meat oven. You could eat dairy immediately after eating the food. You make a closing bracha, like we mentioned, and rinse out your mouth. And then you could eat the dairy right after. You don't have to wait 6 hours like you do after you eat like a piece of meat, like a steak. But you're not allowed to put dairy products on it. So you can't put real butter or real sour cream on that potato that you've cooked in your meat oven. So what do? Well, there are two great products I'm going to tell you about, and they'll really help you in your kosher cooking. The first one is called Earth Balance. It's called Natural Buttery Spread, and it looks like this. Okay, I hope you got to see that. They actually sell in Walmart now. They used to only really sell it in like Whole Foods or here in Richmond, Elwood Thompson's, like the more health food stores, but now they're starting to sell it at Walmart. And it's great because it's totally parve, it's spreadable, and you can bake with it. A lot of margarines just fall apart and become really oily when you bake, but this one holds its holds itself together. So if you want to bake a bunch of parve cookies that you could eat right after your meat meal, you can use Earth Balance, and it's really great. So if you have any questions about that, I'm going to type that into the box. You can see what the title is. If you have questions about it, just please email me. Okay. The second product I'm going to tell you about is called Tofutti, better than sour cream. So if you like sour cream on your baked potato like I do, but you're cooked your potato in a meat oven, this is for you. And it looks like this. And it's really low in fat, and it's totally parve. You can find this, I have never found this in like Walmart. You can find it in the health food section of your local grocery store, or at a health food store like Whole Foods, or here in Richmond at Elwood Thompson's. They also have a line of ice cream which is delicious that you could eat right away after eating meat. You don't have to wait the 6 hours because it's totally parve or neutral. So I'm going to type that in, the name of that company. I actually happen to also know the guy who invented Tofutti. He's a great guy. So that's my product reviews for today, and my little halacha moment of letting you know that you cannot eat a vegetable with dairy on top that's been cooked in a meat oven. If you have any questions, please let me know on Facebook, or hold on a minute, baby, or email me. I'm going to type in my email right now. Yeah, she can have it, yeah. And you can also Facebook me. Please let me know that you were at the kosher class when you Facebook me, because I'm not friends with just anybody. So just type kosher class in a little note, and I'll be like, yay, and I'll friend you. I also post my classes on Facebook after I'm done, so if you want to go back and refer to anything, you of course can. Does anybody have any questions real fast in the last 6-7 minutes we have? I will just give you a minute to type any questions that you might have that came up. Oops. Any questions? Okay, you guys must be thinking. So, good. I'm glad it was clear, and I hope that you enjoyed the class. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to Facebook me or email me. And next time, I'll see you next Tuesday night here at 8 o'clock. Have a good week and have a kosher week. Thank you. Bye. This is taking forever.